Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Standby for Adventure. This is John, and it's THAC0 Thursday, so that means we're going to look at something old from the world of gaming. And in the beginning here, I'm very much starting with D&D, and then we're going to move on to my recommendations for running games for younger people, whether they're under 10 in their tween age years or even maybe in their younger teenage years. Um, we'll go through a whole bunch of things that I've found over the years running games for kids and young adults, and sort of things that I have found useful or have realized after running games that I could have done that better. And so I've got again, probably about 10, 12 different tips that I'm going to run through. But the first thing I want to do is THAC0 Thursday. I really like this idea because it gives a little bit of a peek into the history of game design. And we're so very much at the kind of late part of the beginning of role-playing games. And we're kind of getting into its I guess I would say adolescence, as we see all sorts of different sorts of games coming out, and people have grown to accept it and realize that it's not just one thing or two things like fantasy and science fiction. A role-playing game can in fact be anything. But we're not talking about any of that right now. What we're talking about is THAC0 Thursday, and in THAC0 Thursday we talk about really antiquated or weird ideas from the early days of role-playing that now just seem so counterintuitive and just a little odd, and in some cases just fun. I'm not making fun of any of this stuff. I loved this stuff when I was growing up. These are the games I grew up with. Totally got into it, but they were also things even at the time that I was like, why is it like this? And it was like that just because there was nothing else to base it on. Now we have decades of experience in game design, and the games have changed significantly over the years. And you can see that from something as simple as the stats in D&D being very specific to physical and mental abilities: strength, dexterity, intelligence, constitution, charisma, wisdom. And there are games that instead have stats that are sharp or round or anything. It could be anything. It could be the name of a job. That could be what your skill is. Okay, my cat's behind me. And just all sorts of crazy things that happen. But what I want to talk about today, and we're not going to spend too long on this because you'll get a good idea of it, and if you want to, you can look it up. One of the things that existed in early D&D were class levels, which has been one of the signature things for D&D. As you start off at first level, you go up to second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth. And at each level, something changed, whether it was getting better at rolling to hit, getting more spells available to you, getting higher level spells available to you, getting some special ability from your class, like if you were a paladin or if you were a monk, you would gain different abilities at different levels, and other classes had that too. That sort of thing. Oh, my cat is very coordinated. He jumped off of a thing that's covered by a towel, so he slipped. But anyway, it's interesting because in these early days, one of the other things we had was the way levels worked and what you got experience for was very different. So if we look at this table here, and I know it's huge and ugly, but this column right here is for the fighter. The top, the very top line here is all a dash because that's first level, right? So to be a first level fighter, ranger, paladin, wizard, cleric, druid, thief, they all started out at first level. There was no zero level. But to go up to second level, for a fighter, that took 2,000 experience points. For a ranger or paladin, to get to second level took 2,250. For a wizard, it took 2,500 experience. A cleric, only 1,500, so literally 1,000 less than the wizard. And 2,000 for the druid, so same as the fighter. But what's interesting here is they're all broken out into different columns because they continue to be different all the way down. And I missed the Thief Bard is only 1,250 experience points to go from first level to second level. Some of these disparities continue. Well, all of them continue, but continue for a long time. So if you were, say, a fifth level, if you had, let's just say, 16,000 experience, you would be a fifth level fighter. But you would only be a fourth level paladin. You would only be a fourth level wizard. No, you would be a fourth level wizard. You would be a fifth level cleric. You would be a fifth level druid. And you would be a fifth level thief. So you can see right there, there's a little bit of disparity because the ranger and paladin takes a little bit more, and the wizard takes quite a bit more to get to that fifth level. So they're stuck down a level compared to everybody else who has the exact same amount of experience. Same thing, even at sixth level, 32,000 experience for the fighter and ranger, 40,000 for the wizard. Now keep in mind, this is back when wizards had 1d4 for hit points. So not only and couldn't fight well, but they did have access to spells, but they had access to just a handful. That number hasn't changed very much over the years. The addition of cantrips really helped the wizard and every spellcasting class out. But they struggled in the early levels, and wizards were a challenge to actually play. But yeah, it's just crazy because you could, especially as you got higher and higher and higher in level, you could have a difference of 2 or maybe even 3 levels between characters that have the exact same amount of experience. And I just think it's hilarious, and it wasn't until, boy, I want to say maybe 3rd edition, but maybe it was even before. No, it had to be 3rd edition. I think it was with 3rd edition is when they did away with this alteration or these, different experience levels, different amounts of experience being required to be of a certain level, and just made it a unified chart so that, in theory, everybody who showed up to the game would be having the same experience points given to them, going up in level at the same time. There's no sort of weird, I'm a level down from you guys, and then the GM would also have to figure out, how do I challenge a group, how do I balance an encounter with some characters that are 5th level and some that are 4th, because there's going to be a different number of hit points for them, and in some cases, vastly different number of hit points. When you think about something like a wizard having a D4 and a fighter having a D10, the wizard's also going to be a lower level with significantly fewer hit points. So it was really funky to try and figure out, okay, what's gonna happen here? And it also became the best tactic to take out the wizard first and the cleric first, because if they were allowed to stay up, they had powerful enough abilities once they got there, got to that level that they had fireball or something like that, that not only was it effective to take them out because it removed them from the battlefield with all their spells, but it was easy to take them out because they didn't have as many hit points as anybody else, because they only had a D4, and Constitution was not a score that the wizard typically was supposed to have high, although most people who had a decent stat left over after, say, intelligence for a wizard probably put it into Constitution or Dexterity to increase the chance of them living. So this is just kind of a funky, weird thing that I played with for years and years and years, and even at the time, so many people recognized that it was kind of a strange thing to do, but it took a long time to get fixed. Other games addressed this in other ways. Games like Champions, which was big back in the day, and same with GURPS, gave out experience that were like, okay, you get 1 experience, 2 experience, 3 experience, 4 experience. Like, it was a really small number, but you spent those points to do things, to buy things for your character, which was also another innovation at the time. D&D was very random, and in addition to random, it also had things that were pre-built for you. So as you went up as a fighter, you got this increase, that increase, this increase, that increase, as you went up every level, and other games didn't handle it that way. So kind of an interesting thing to see where D&D started in this whole going up in levels. And we'll have more things to talk about with this, because it's kind of a crazy topic. I need to pull up this here document to take a look at it. And now we're going to move on to the main part of this here episode. Yeah, that's it. We're going to talk about running games for kids. And I've got a list over here of a bunch of different things running games for kids. And when I say kids, I mean anyone who... I mean, really, this could apply for anyone at all who's new to role-playing, who wants to be introduced, but either isn't quite sure if they're interested or how interested they are, have no idea of what's involved or what's going to be asked of them at the table. So all of these tips are useful for that. I think these tips are especially useful for, kids. I've seen kids as young as 5, 6 years old playing role-playing games. I won't necessarily say D&D, but it very likely was D&D. All the way up to whatever, doesn't 12, 13, 14, 15, 20, 30, so all sorts of people like to learn how to play games. But here we go. I will run through my list of things here and then give an explanation of each of them. So when you're running games for younger people, make sure everyone is welcome at the table. Obviously, you should be playing with friends or acquaintances that you actually like and want to get along with. But make sure everybody's welcome at the table. Perhaps start with a board game to kind of teach some of the rules, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Correct bad behavior at the table. You're still the adult at the table, and they're still kids, so make sure they're not being mean to each other or sniping at each other, and just kind of keep control of things. Keep the game short. That's a huge one. And we'll go through all of these in more detail. Keep the action going. Don't pause to interject little bits of humor or side stories, things like that, because you're only going to have a really small amount of time, especially with new players, because in some cases attention spans just won't last for long time. So the more you can do in the game and keep them involved and keep them active and keep them going, the better. One of the things you'll also find playing with new players and kids is you're going to have to sort of rein in their desire to do 5 billion things in a single action, or to butt into another player's turn because they want to respond and they thought of something and they're excited and they want their character to do something, but they don't yet understand the whole action economy and taking turns and things like that. So you'll have to be aware of that. It will certainly be a thing. Make the choices in your games fairly easy and obvious. You don't want it to be like stupid easy, but you don't want it to be really incredibly difficult and a hard moral challenge for kids who are looking to learn how to play a game and not necessarily get into the deep philosophical issues behind whatever is going on in the game. Be silly. But I say that when you are silly, you as the game master, I recommend playing it pretty straight and let the funny stuff come from the reactions and actions of the players, because it will be hilarious. And you don't have to set up very much to get them going, believe me. There's the classic story about the player who didn't understand what the word gazebo meant, and he tried to attack the gazebo. It's just funny stuff is going to happen. On the learning side of things, make them do their own math. So when they roll a die and have to add numbers or find things on the character sheet, help them out, obviously, but make them do their own math. If there are questions about rules, have them look it up and have them read it out to the table. And we'll get into why I think that's a good idea. And then I've got another one at the end, and we're going to go through, I've got a stack of games over here. And I've got some on the computer screen as well, and we're going to go through and I'm going to point out some games that might be really good to use as a first game. I'm going to move over here to Drive Through RPG to show off the first of those, but let's just go through here. So when you're running games for younger people, I'm going to expand on all the things I just talked about. Make sure everybody who comes to your table feels welcome. This is not me saying you have to be inclusive and you have to do whatever. No, all I'm saying is if you are inviting someone over to any social activity, you should treat that person as if they are a welcome guest. If it's somebody who's only an acquaintance, be even more polite and more open to what and who they are, because you may not know everything about them and you don't want to shut them down. You want them to feel welcome and feel like they're in a comfortable place that they can play a game. Nobody should be insulting somebody else unless, people have been friends for years and years and you kind of rib each other because that's just what you do. That's fine. But try and keep that a little bit to a minimum when you're dealing with new players, because you are trying to create an environment that everybody feels comfortable in. And if you feel comfortable, great, but make sure that that's true for everybody else as well. And like I said, this isn't about some liberal agenda. This is about just being a polite person. And if you're not polite to your house guests, then you have bigger problems. And even if it's not at your house, if it's at school, if it's at a church group, you should still be nice to the people that you are, in theory, wanting to be friends with and wanting to play a game with. Games are inherently social. But that's it. That's all I'll say about that. I will also recommend starting with a board game. And there are a number of really fantastic board games, and I will point some of these out. D&D, or rather Wizards of the Coast, publishes a number of board games that all use the same basic game system that's very, very derivative of D&D on purpose, because they wanted to have a board game that introduced some of the concepts like rolling a d20 or just having a 20-sided die in the house, introduce some of the monsters, include some miniatures. And you can see here on the screen, there is a tutorial on how to play this. You can buy it from a local store. You can buy it from Amazon. And these games are actually pretty fun. This game at retail is $65, and it's playable just as a board game where you are basically adventuring as Drizzt Do'Urden and his companions, going through some kind of dungeon and fighting monsters and bad guys and things like that. This game includes 42 miniatures of heroes and monsters, 13 interlocking cardstock dungeon tiles in sheets, so you can punch them out and put them together, and you can see one of those right here. So this would be something that you would punch out and you can kind of click them together. It's really a pretty nice little system, and it's just made of cardboard. 200 encounter cards and treasure cards. So those are the things that you might earn during the game or fight during the game. A rule book to explain the rules, a scenario book to set up different scenarios that are like basically different dungeons, and then a 20-sided die, and that's what you use for the game. Now the nice thing is, the Drizzt Do'Urden game is also compatible with this Castle Ravenloft game, and the Wrath of Ashardalon, and I'm curious if it has even... where's the board games? Tabletop games. That is not That is not the thing I'm looking for. That's all right. Um, but yes, these are all they're just fun games, and they will give new players an idea of the feel of the game that you want to play. And like I said, this is based on D&D. It uses some of the D&D settings, such as Ravenloft, such as the Forgotten Realms, and just is a fun little board game. And if you like the the board game aspect of D&D, the tabletop, moving little men around on a board, this is exactly that. There's no real role playing that goes on in it unless you inject that into the game, and you certainly could. But it's self-contained. You run through a little adventure until something happens, and then you either win or lose based on how well you did in that adventure. They're fun. I have one or two of these box sets, and I've played them a number of times, and they're a good time. But that will familiarize people with what the rules are like before you dive into the role playing, full bore at the table sort of game. Other good options for this are from Z-Man Games. There's a game called Mice and Mystics, and you can find some actual plays of these. I think Will Wheaton actually did one on tabletop years ago. And this is basically a board game role-playing game. So it has a set story that's not predetermined, but it is pre-plotted, and you go from one board to the next trying to complete objectives on each board, and your characters can get items, they can level up, so they become more powerful. It's really a very clever game. They also do, and I would very much recommend it. It's a lot of fun. They also do a game called Stuffed Fables, which is a little cutesier. Well, compared to mice running around fighting people with swords, which is already pretty cute. But Stuffed Fables is, they call a storyboard game. And you play basically cute little stuffed animals that try and go rescue people and do things. And this is really just an incredibly clever little game, because you can see here in the middle of this page that we're on, the book folds open flat with a binder in the middle, and on one side is a map, and on the other side is all the information about what's going on in that encounter. So you move your guys around on the board, you fight bad guys that come in to deal with you, and the rules are not D&D derivative from D&D. They're completely different system, but it will get you that sort of role-playing experience if you want to introduce people to the idea of it before you go in and just start playing a role-playing game. These are really fantastic games. I have another one that unfortunately is on the very bottom of the stack here that I will also show you, but it was based on the Pixar movie from last year or 2 years ago, that I can't remember the name of, but as soon as I get it out, we'll take a look at it. So consider starting with a board game. That's actually how my friend Dave got me into gaming. We were hanging out and we played Life and Monopoly, and then he was like, "Hey, you want to play this other game?" That was D&D, and that's all it took. So that's the one of the first things is consider playing a board game. One of the things you will have to do at the table, and this is moving on to the next point, is you're going to have to be the adult. At least in theory, you're going to have to be the adult. And if you're the GM, you are already automatically the person whose word is final. That's just part of the social contract when you sit down at the table. Everybody needs to understand that. You should explain that. Like, hey, if there's an issue that comes up, I'm the one who's in charge of this meeting, effectively. I get to end a conversation if we've been going on too long about this, that, or the other thing. If people are fighting, put an end to it. We're not going to do that. I will decide what the answer is as GM. If you don't like that decision, we can talk about it afterwards. But just keep in mind that you're going to be the one who has to keep control of the table, make sure everybody is being nice to each other, or at least not being really difficult and a jerk to each other. and point out if something isn't appropriate. And you may have to ask somebody to leave if they are not being inappropriate. This again is a social interaction. It is a social experience, and if people aren't respecting that and aren't respecting the other people at the table, then they have no business being at that table. So remember, you're the one in charge, and hopefully that won't be an issue. But with younger kids, and even a little bit older kids, you might have to kind of step up and say, okay, you're being unreasonable, or whatever, however you want to approach it. I don't know what the situation is, obviously, because it's all completely hypothetical. But just know you're the one who's ultimately going to have to speak up and kind of keep a handle on things. This is next thing is probably the biggest suggestion I would have, and it's also one of the more challenging if you're not very experienced at telling stories in a given time period. And that is to keep the playtime relatively short, to an hour, 2 hours at most. I would say 2 hours, especially if you're talking about, maybe kids that are 13 and younger. And again, it kind of depends on if you're dealing with kids that have ADHD, or just have a really short attention span, because people have short attention spans. But the shorter you keep it, the more engaged they will be, and the more you will be able to keep their attention for that full amount of time, as opposed to letting it go too long and you can see them start to wander, or they start to read or look at their phone. And all my tips for how to be a good player and how to be a good GM, you should have already watched. They're on the channel. But those still apply. All I'm saying is keep the time short, and because you have to keep the time short, you have to make sure that the story you're telling, at least some part of it, can be wrapped up in a single session. And that's sort of a storytelling, game running skill that you will develop over time. But the characters will almost never get done as much as you think they will, because they will talk, because they will do crazy things that you didn't expect. And but just be ready to have something fairly short that they can accomplish in an hour or two, and then when they start to fade, say, okay, we're at a good point, and it'll feel a little bit more natural if there's been some sort of conclusion or resolution to something, and they will have had fun, as opposed to dragging it out to 3 or 4 hours, and they're, oh my god, this is taking so long, and that's just a long time for somebody of that age. Even for adults, I run games twice a week that end up being only about 2.5 to maybe 3 hours long, and that just does not feel long enough for me. But it's a good skill to have, to be able to run short games, and just keep that in mind. Keep things simple. This flows into the next point very, very well. Keep the action going, whether it's combat, role-playing, or exploration, or whatever your game is about. Just make sure that things are happening. Don't let there be dead air of nobody saying anything. If you have to jump in as the GM to either explain something further, give a little bit more detail, engage with a player's character in character as an NPC, to draw them out to say something, or to tell them something else that might get them to then speak up. You're gonna have to be the one sort of keeping things moving forward if there is some kind of a lull. So keep that in mind. Action is good because it also keeps the attention of the players, and they will feel more excited and invested if something is happening that they can pay attention to and that they're locked in on. So just keep it going. One of the very best pieces of advice ever in a role-playing game product was in the original Star Wars D6 system back from West End Games, and that was, if things have slowed down, have the stormtroopers kick in the doors. And it's a silly thing to say, but it's actually served me and my group of players that I've played with for decades so well, because players get into this thing where they have too many threads happening or too many things going on that they want to deal with, and they just sort of get into their heads, or they start talking to each other and nothing is happening in the game. And so just have somebody show up and attack them, and then come up with a reason why. Or maybe you already have a built-in reason for in your campaign for why people might be hunting them down. There you go. That's, if it gets slow, send some orcs in, send some bandits in, send some of the guard in, send, like, anybody who might realistically be after the player characters for whatever reason. Maybe somebody hired some assassins to come kill them. It could be anything. So keep that in mind. Keep the action moving. One of the things I have also noticed, and this is a new topic, that younger players do a lot, and this is sort of part of your role as the GM to keep a handle on everything, is they think they can do many rounds worth of actions in a single round of, say, D&D time. And that's great, because that means they're excited. So they've thought about, like, I want to do this, and 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 my character's going to react to that and say this to this person. And it's like, okay, hold on a minute. This is the situation, and sometimes you will have to pause them and say, Ed's character just said this to this guard, and what do you want to do? You just told me you wanted to pull out your knife, sneak up behind him, stab the guard, open the door, and go inside. You can't do all of those things. And explain why. Because you have a standard action, a bonus action, and a move action. And it will be annoying to everyone to begin with, because there is that limitation. And you can fudge it a little bit and say, oh, okay, basically allow them to do a little more than they normally would be able to, if it doesn't have a huge effect on things. And really all you're doing is kind of teaching the basics at this point anyway. So they will get better as they learn more and more of the system. But you want to be able to explain to them why they can't do a full minute's worth of action in a single combat round in D&D, which is only about 6 seconds long. And like I said, they'll get over that. It's just a learning curve of understanding how many things you can do in a round, and what constitutes an action, or a bonus action, or a move action, and what they're able to do. They need to understand the logic behind the action economy. And as I said, that'll become more and more obvious the more experience they get with the game. So just be aware of it when you first sit down, and probably the first couple of sessions, that you'll need to say, okay, I know you have a bunch of things you want to do. Which of the 4 things you just told me do you want to do this turn? And then maybe next turn you can do the other ones if the situation still warrants them. It's a perfectly normal conversation to have. Make your choices easy for the players. Don't give them tough moral choices. Don't bring up things about, is it okay to kill all the goblins? Aren't we the bad guys if we do that? That's not really what you're there to play the game for, unless that is what you're there to play the game for, which is also fine. But you're just playing out a story that you all thought would be fun. There's not really any consequences to killing a whole bunch of goblins, especially in a game for kids. You would want to instead, and some games do completely non-violent resolution to things, which is also fine. It just depends on what you're looking to do. But guess what? Kids like to play violent games. They just do, and it's all fantasy. So this is a great way for them to kind of get that out of their system And you can tell more advanced stories later on, more morally interesting stories or ethical quandaries and things like that later. When you're first playing a game, you want it to be pretty simple. Don't set your bad guys up to maybe be bad guys. No, no, no. The bad guys should be bad guys. And maybe there's a chance that they could be redeemed. Keep that in mind. A lot of early gamers or new players really do try to look for non-violent ways to resolve things or to talk to somebody, when more experienced gamers might just be like, all right, I take out my sword and attack. And that's just because over time we've been trained to tackle the problems that way. But I can't tell you the number of times I've sat down with new players and their first inclination is not to cast a spell or reach for a weapon. It's to try and help. So be open to that, and maybe you'll have to come up with a completely different resolution to the story that you were thinking of, but it's what the players are asking you for, because they have said, I want to talk to this person and see if we can come to some arrangement, as opposed to just killing them, which doesn't do any good and is also a very good lesson. Be silly. You're playing with new gamers. Everybody wants to have fun. Feel free to throw a gingerbread golem at them, and maybe you just use the clay golem stats, or change the stats for something else to have it be a weird little monster. Have an ice method could be little snowman attackers who gang up on the player characters as they're wandering around the countryside, or the frozen north or something like that. You can always reskin monsters as something different. They don't have to look like they do in the monster manual. They can be anything. If you want to have pseudo dragons that aren't although pseudo dragons would be a fantastic thing to include in a game for younger people, because who wouldn't want a cool little pseudo dragon? But you could have them instead be magical bats from the moon who have flown down to cause chaos or whatever. Like, it could be anything. You can reskin any monster, make it however you want to make it. You want to have an episode, or a game that's a little bit scary. Maybe you use something like a scarecrow. All kids are going to know what a scarecrow is, because it's such a common, scary thing. It's out at Halloween. So yeah, take advantage of that stuff. Play into the tropes of what they understand. Use your imagination to come up with fun things. Don't necessarily try to be goofy. Don't try to make your game funny. And instead, what I would say is, feel free to introduce elements that are a little off-kilter and let the players have fun with that. And you should, of course, echo that back to them. But you should kind of try to play things straight, because you're there to set up the situations for the players to interact with and have fun with. And they will do ridiculous things. A good example of a game that, or something that could be a game that's a really good example, is Ghostbusters. So in Ghostbusters, Bill Murray, and obviously they all have very funny lines, but Bill Murray is definitely the most off-kilter character in there. And he has a bunch of funny lines, but the situation itself of the end of the world and these ghosts coming out and killing everyone is a serious situation. But the player characters, which would be the Ghostbusters, react in very silly ways sometimes, and even the situations are set up kind of humorously, well, very humorously, with characters like Slimer, who shoves all sorts of food in his mouth and it just drops out the bottom. It's just automatically funny. So be willing to let the players react to things as if they are silly, and not just have to react to them always as if like, oh, I'm in horrible danger and I'm gonna die and blah blah blah. No, it can just be fun sometimes. So let that happen. Like, let the sophomoric, silly, goofy, kids style stuff that even as adults we enjoy sometimes. Let that stuff happen, and it will be so much fun. And maybe in your game they end up fighting a giant marshmallow man that's just a slightly rewritten purple worm or something like that, right? Like you can use any monster and just make it into something else, and then it becomes unique and fun and funny and interesting that's only at your game table. Um, One of the other videos I've done on here is about why gaming, tabletop role playing, and gaming in general is good for education. And that is certainly true when you're running games for new people too, and these next couple of points are specifically about that. When you're at the table, if you're an older player and have a lot of experience with gaming, or you're just good at math or whatever, you might feel some amount of frustration. You will feel some amount of frustration when the kids try to add things together and either get it wrong or do that thing where they just sort of look and guess. They're not actually doing the math in their head, or they don't automatically know it. They just say, "Oh, 7 + 9 is 14," and you're like, "Nope." Don't correct them immediately. Say, "Look at it again. Add them up. Like, what is it really? Count it out if you need to, and figure out what the actual answer is." Oh, okay, 9 and 8, 17. Right, got it. Okay, so then move on, because one of the points of playing the game really is to get better at playing the game, and one of the ways you get better at playing the game is knowing how to do the math better and faster. And very quickly they will get good at that math, not just because they're doing it over and over and over and over when they are making rolls, but because it's something that hopefully they are interested in, because they're playing a game, and the likelihood of them succeeding or failing hangs on the balance of if they get that math right. And so it's important to them to do the math right to get the result that they really want. So just encourage them to do their own math, to figure it out, to add things up themselves. Tell everybody, don't help unless you can do it without just giving them the answer. And if they really struggle, then just take a second and say, let's just figure this out together. Like, add up the numbers, count them out, however you need to do it. This isn't embarrassing somebody. You certainly don't want to be embarrassing somebody, but you do want to make it clear to them that it's important that you're not going to always be able to double check their numbers, and they want to make sure that they're confident in the answer that they're giving you, so that you can tell them if they succeed or fail based on what they actually rolled. You should also be on the lookout for cheating, but cheating is always one of those things where it's like, if somebody's going to cheat, then why play the game? It honestly is kind of my feeling. If all you do is succeed, then just go read a book. So yes, have them do their own math, no matter how simple you think it is. Just make sure they're adding things up and subtracting things, whatever modifiers. Math in D&D is not particularly complicated. It's adding, subtracting, multiplying by 1.5 or 2, or halving, and maybe even halving again. And that's about as complicated as the math gets in D&D. So you're not going to be dealing with super advanced stuff. You're just going to be dealing with it a lot. It's going to come up every single time somebody rolls a die. You will have to do math. If you have rules questions that come up during the game, this is another educational sort of thing. Because everybody's learning the rules, or at least most people at the table are probably learning the rules, when a question comes up about the rules, either you or one of the players should look it up and find where it is and read it out. And I highly recommend reading out loud to the entire table so that not only can the people around the table also learn the rules a little bit better and you get your rules reinforced a little bit, but the person doing the reading gets more comfortable reading aloud, but they also get practice reading, and it's not necessarily simple reading. Some of the rules in D&D, they use very specific words and phrases to mean very specific things, and that is another part of learning the game. So take the time to learn the rules, take the time to have somebody read out rules when there's some kind of question at the table, and that will benefit everyone in multiple different ways. That's all of the tips I will give for this. I have one more thing that I'm going to add that's not really a tip for running for younger players, but those are all my tips. I'll include them all in the notes for this in the description, so if you want to look there, you can see they're all written there. But the other thing that I will say as well, and there's games that do this even now. I have one here behind me that I actually just got in the mail. This is the new Hellboy role-playing game, which is based on 5th edition D&D, and it comes in this is a slipcase sort of thing, but it's a nice, good-sized book. And they did some interesting things in here that are pretty interesting in terms of choosing your race or lineage background. They have things like you can be a ghost or a demon or a psychic. It's not you're a human or an elf or a dwarf. It's very, very different. And they also have different special abilities. Come on, kitten. Leave the microphone. They also have different special abilities and powers that you can get based on your classes and things like that, because obviously you're not going to be a fighter and a cleric and a bard, and they don't have those classes. They have completely new classes. So it is a D&D game. It uses 5th edition rules, but they've changed it to have superpowers, really. And you can also do that. That's a game that does that. And the other thing that I would recommend, if you have people around your table, kids around your table who are big fans of superheroes, is maybe you could sit down and write up something that works, sort of like Captain America's shield or Thor's hammer, which actually there is the hammer of thunderbolts or the dwarven thrower or something like that in D&D that already exists, that you can throw your hammer and it comes back to you. But keep that in mind, like that's the sort of stuff that players would just absolutely love. Like when I was a teenager, my buddy and I were huge superhero fans, and we would have traps that we would place for each other that would like cut off our fingers and replace them with magical constructs that allowed us to climb on walls like Spider-Man and shoot webbing. And you can create crazy stuff like that in your game if you want to, and just let your players have a good time. Like, they will love it because they know how Spider-Man fights and moves and what powers he has, and they know Deadpool can regenerate really fast and Wolverine can regenerate and he's got claws in his hands. And so there's all this stuff that you can do to sort of make your game align more with what your players really would like to play. Even though you're playing in a D&D world or a fantasy world, you can do anything you want within that setting. And it's a lot of fun. We had things like, the Vision's gem on his forehead that gave you powers. We had like all sorts of crazy stuff that we wrote up, and I'm sure they were horribly broken and really stupid, but it was a lot of fun. We had a great time with it, and that was kind of before we had discovered any other superhero games. Um, the other thing I want to do here is run through some other board games, or not board games, role-playing games that if you are running for kids and you think D&D is too complicated, some other options for you. And I'm going to start on Drive-Thru RPG with their they have Hero Forge Games created a game called Hero Kids. And this has been up here for 10, 11 years, something like that. So it's a game that's been around. It's won a bunch of awards. Tons and tons of people have purchased this. It's got 323 different ratings on here of 4.5 stars. So it's a good little game. And it is specifically made to introduce kids to the concept of role-playing. You can see the art is kind of cute. And it's really inexpensive. This is, let's see, to get the PDF is only $6, and to get the PDF and a softcover copy of the book is only $12. Really, really a good deal. And they have a bunch of products that are in this line, so you will not, these are all different things here in this list, so you will not run out of things for this game unless you run out of players. So this is a good option, and it's on Drive-Thru RPG. There is also Monster Slayers, and this, I had forgotten about this, but doing some research for this, I discovered it existed again. Monster Slayers, The Heroes of Hesiod. This is actually a very simplified version of D&D from the creators of D&D, and they even say this, let's see, this version of Dungeons & Dragons develops an array of essential educational skills, including math skills, reading skills, writing skills, cooperation and leadership, problem solving, and creative thinking. And it's just a simpler version of the game that has some really very cool, oh, that's a terrible image, that has a nice little layout here with fun little drawings, very cute little dragon, cute little beholder, cute, I don't know if that's supposed to be, oh, bullet. But it's just a really fun little version of D&D that you can use to play D&D or to teach a beginning level of D&D. Again, it's up on Drive-Thru RPG. It is free, so you can just download it. Let's see here. Some other games that people might enjoy. Doe, Pilgrims of the Flying Temple. This is just such a fantastic looking little game. It uses a game called Fate, or Fudge, which is just an acronym that doesn't really matter. It does use some special dice, although you can just use regular 6-sided dice to play as well. And they recommend it for 3 to 5 players, ages 12 and up, and 1 to 2 hours of playtime. Think of this as sort of Avatar: The Last Airbender, because this came out a number of years ago before the actual Avatar: The Last Airbender role-playing game, which just got kickstarted, was even being made. It's a very cool little game, a very pretty game. You might be able to still find it in print. Evil Hat Productions is the publisher of it, so they would have the physical product, but the PDF is here on Drive-Thru for only $10. Really a cool little game if you like Avatar or The Legend of Korra. Related to Fate is the Fate Core rules system, and Fate in theory is simple enough for anyone to pick up and play very quickly, but for the GM it can sometimes be a bit odd if you're coming from a game like D&D, because Fate does things, does some things very differently that may feel really weird to try and do. But check it out, because it will allow you to play anything, and they have tons of other PDFs and books that support this system. It's what's considered a generic system, meaning that you can run it in any setting, any time period, any genre. But that also means you probably need to make up a number of things in order for it to work correctly. It's a good little game, that's for sure. Another one to check out is Toon, which, as you might expect, is based on cartoons. It's been around forever, since the early 80s. I'm not even sure exactly when it was printed. And it allows you to run a game as if it were a cartoon, like a Warner Brothers or Looney Tunes sort of, any kind of crazy thing that you might think of, you can do in Toon. And it's just a fun little game. It's great for kids because it's goofy and fun and silly, and you can do anything you want. So I recommend that as well. You can sometimes find these in places like half-price books or rummage sales, that sort of thing. Any version of the game will work. You can download a preview on the Steve Jackson publishing site. You can order a copy of the PDF, the full PDF from here. I don't know if it is currently in print. It might be, but this PDF is $15 and is 212 pages and will be a lot of fun. There are also a couple of supplements for it. But that's another option for you if you want to try something completely outside of the realm of D&D, but still a tabletop game. Toon is a good option. The last thing I'll mention here is there are lots and lots of what are called indie games out there. They tend to be very experimental, and some of them are absolutely incredible. And one of them is by John Harper, and this is a game called Lady Blackbird. Lady Blackbird is an excellent, excellent option for new players because it's sort of like Star Wars combined with steampunk combined with Firefly. There you go. That's about it. And the way the characters are created and the way the story is told, it kind of has this setup that's already done. You have a choice of a bunch of different characters that are all going to be of interest and all going to be cool and useful and interesting. And the GM gets a setup that they tell the player what's going on, and the players react, and the rules are very simple, and there's a way to level up your character and even customize your characters as you do it. And it's a fantastic little game, especially if you want something that is easy to play, everything's already written up for you, easy to run, has scenarios built in to it already that you can just riff off of, and that is able to be played in a short period of time, and over a short number of sessions you can complete an entire story arc. I honestly believe it could support much longer play as well, but if you want to say to new players, like, hey, I've got a game that I'm going to run 4 sessions of, I have everything that you need, let's all sit down and play, we just need some dice and pencils, here are the pieces of paper for your characters, and you're off and running for those 4 sessions, and at the end you say, what do you think? Do you want to try and play something else? Do you want to continue this? I think Lady Blackbird is a great little game and a great little introduction. Some other things we're going to go through. If you like superheroes, I absolutely recommend almost any game on the market from Steve Kenson or game he's been involved in. This is Icons, which he wrote and created a few years ago. It's based on the Fate system, but very, very different. And it's excellent, simple. The numbers are relatively small, so you're not adding huge numbers, and I highly recommend this game. And you can see, like, the art is just great. It's by a guy named Dan Hauser, and it's just very, very cool and cute. This is actually a print-on-demand book, and you can see it is in color and is really a nice book. That's the secret origin of Saguaro on the page there, and they're fantastic books, and he's got 4, 5, 6 different books out, and then there are also supplements that are PDF only, like adventures and collections of bad guys and things like that. I'm going to go back just to here, and I will search for icons because it is on here. Yeah, so you can see here are all sorts of icons products that are available. And you can order these right off this site, and you're either download the PDF or download or order the physical book, and you're set. It's good stuff. Another game that is also very simple and very able to run almost anything is Savage Worlds. Absolutely love this game system. It's a little more random because you aren't rolling dice that are very big, like a D20. Well, D20 would make it more random, but the dice explode, meaning if you roll the highest number on a die, you roll again and add. So you can get in like quite large numbers, but you're only typically rolling like a D4, D6, D8, D10, D12, something like that. Not a lot of dice. And Savage Worlds is another generic system. It's written so you could run a fantasy game, a sci-fi game, a western game, which is Deadlands is the setting created specifically for Savage Worlds. Super, super fun. And it's basically post-Civil War America has been cursed by an uprising of the undead, and they're sort of hidden and sort of not. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on, and it's kind of stunted the growth of America, but there's also magic and undead and weird monsters and ghost rock, and like there's all sorts of cool stuff. If you're into D&D and you really want to play D&D as opposed to something else, there are these different starter sets. So there is a Rick and Morty starter set. There is the original starter set that has the very excellent Ruins of Minds of Phandelver adventure. Fantastic adventure. There's an update to it called the D&D Essentials Kit, and that adventure I think picks up from or can be run in addition to the one from the starter set, which is very cool. This came out a few years ago, which is the Stranger Things D&D set, which includes the Demigorgon mini there, which is kind of fun. If Icons is not a game that you think looks interesting, there is Tiny Supers, if you want to try a different superhero game. I worked for years on Mutants and Masterminds, which is based on D&D as well, so that might be an option. The Expanse, if you're talking about people who like a certain setting, like The Expanse, there are all sorts of licensed products. You could play a Game of Thrones game with the Song of Ice and Fire role-playing game. You can play, as I said before, there's a new Power Rangers game that just came out, role-playing game. There's, let's see, The Expanse. I'm trying to think of everything that's... There's like an unbelievable number of licensed games out there, so you can find something. Mouse Guard I mentioned in one of the other videos. I wish I could really recommend that for starting players, but the game system is... I think too prone to failure. Your characters fail too often. At least that's been my experience with the game system. Another board game that you could try is this, which is Role Player. Role Player is a very, very cool game. It's basically writing up your D&D character as a board game. So you're rolling dice and trying to plug numbers in to create the stats for your strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. And then depending on what color die is in a certain location, you get points, and depending on what the total number is, you get points. It's a very, very cool game. And there are expansions out for it that introduce familiars and enemies and like all sorts of... It's really a neat game. This was the last game that I was talking about. What is this from? Quests of Yore is based on the Pixar Disney adventure game that I just cannot remember the name of. Onward! That's it. So if you saw Onward, this is a very big box and a really cool game. That's a lot like that Mice and Mystics and the other one I mentioned, Stuffed Fables. So it includes like a little GM screen that comes in the box, and it has dice, and it has miniatures, and it has the rules for everything, and it has adventures. So here's the adventure book. That is that, and then here is the this is the Tome of Quests rather, and this is the player's guide. So everything you need to play the game comes with a bunch of minis, and some of them are actually very, very cool. Definitely. Oh, here comes my cat. Come on, go away, kitten. Go. No, don't stay here. Sorry, I'm sure everybody wants to see the cat, but he will cause chaos. I have too many things up here at the moment. But these are really cool little minis based on the characters from the animated movie, which was a whole lot of fun. So that was the dragon. Here's the manticore, who owns that restaurant that they go to. You can see the sword is bent here, but it'll just go back if you do it. And it has everything you need to play the game. So again, another option that if you're looking for a role-playing experience and you want to do something a little bit different or something that's actually geared specifically towards kids, Mice and Mystics, Stuffed Fables, and Quests of Yore are fantastic options for you. I think that's going to be it for today. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. And I'll be back maybe this weekend, definitely by Tuesday, with a new video. I've got more things to talk about, and I hope this was useful for you. There's tons of games out there for anybody, and like I said, you can find something that interests you and the people that you're potentially gaming with. So take a look around. I hope you find something you like, and get to gaming. Stand by for adventure.